Chapter 28, which is Forest 1. Terms used in this chapter. Mutually assured destruction, a military strategy, in which two opposing military forces are powerful enough to completely destroy each other. The attacker must think that he will be destroyed with his victim if he attacks. The theory is that no state would start an attack if attacking its enemy means its own destruction. Jude uses this term to refer to Yellow Storm's destructive storm-like attacks, which could backfire on her. Remember that she bled from her nose and fainted in the last chapters. A day before leaving Langeais, Jude and Cordelia came to the balcony to have their tete-a-tete, which had become a regular event now, and the two immediately began their operational meeting. Let's begin with checking our harvest. Jude wasn't just talking about the things that Count Chase gave them. The two had made their own preparations in their short stay at Langeais. I got a couple of potions. These are D-rank potions, physical strength, mana recovery, detoxification and stimulants just in case. As a commercial city, Langeais had an abundance of magic items. Cordelia did not spare in spending money to secure supplies, as evidenced by the fact that she wasn't called the biggest hunting king in Legend of Heroes 2 for no reason. So I'm almost out of money. Do you not care much about saving money? HMPH, my father gave me money though, you saw it all right. She was right. Before Count Chase left, he gave us a bag of gold coins, saying it was to add to our travel expenses. Thank you, father. Jude, who was grateful to Count Chase, changed the topic before Cordelia talks about proper division of money NP Pang again. I got some equipment. Fortunately, the blacksmiths in Langeais were very good. Oh Knuckles, you completely bought something exclusive for you. You've gone the martial arts route and not the swordsman route. Until now, Jude had been fighting by holding the sun's necklace like Knuckles whenever necessary, but it was too much to properly call it Knuckles. There were also concerns that the sun's necklace might be damaged. Therefore, Jude had a blacksmith forge some kind of specialized Knuckles that can fit the sun's necklace, so that he could fully utilize its divine power. Well, if you consider your equipment, and so on, your combat power is higher on the martial arts side right now. I have Chun Mujic, so it'll be okay. Jude won't lose that much even if he changed routes on the way. Cordelia was convinced, and soon looked at the other items that Jude had taken out. Most of the items were protective gear. This is usually worn outside the clothes. Isn't it good because it's thin? That's a very thin chain mail. Wouldn't it hardly increase your defense? But this is reality. It would be much better than nothing. You wear it so that you can avoid directly getting hurt when you get stabbed or cut by a sword in the first place. Well, sure. Cordelia nodded as she looked at the chain mail made of thin chains and shaped like a t-shirt. Now let's move on to today's highlight. It was the items given by Count Chase. Jude pointed to the black bracelet he wore on his right wrist. You've known this bracelet once, right? Magic defense. This is a C-rank bracelet that is especially useful in blocking dark magic. Gee, give me one too. I'll use it reasonably instead. Jude had a wily smile as he next raised his left hand. Next is the ring. Are you wearing it already? Yes, why? It's nothing, just. Cordelia mumbled at the end of her words, before she took out a handkerchief from her pocket and carefully unfolded it. Inside it was a ring that looked exactly like Jude's. Put it on your left hand's ring finger. It's a couple ring to begin with. I know that, okay. Cordelia took a deep breath and swallowed deeply. And as soon as she was about to pick up the ring, give me your hand. Give me your hand. Oh. When Cordelia held out her hand reflexively, Jude immediately picked up the ring and naturally put it on her left ring finger. Well, good, is it because your hands are pretty? Asked Cordelia. Yes, oh of course, Cordelia's pretty. Cordelia snorted and quickly pulled her hand back, pretending to be calm, and Jude laughed at the sight. Why? No, just. Jude shrugged once and turned the topic around for Cordelia. Before your father left, he gave me the instructions. About the ring. As Cordelia asked while fiddling with her left ring finger, Jude nodded and answered. First off, there are two effects. What effects? The first is that the magical effect of the rings becomes stronger if it's worn by two people. By how much? 1.1 to 1.2 times. Oh, is that good? Does that make attack or curse magic stronger? Both were generally magic, whether it's attack or curse. At the idea that was truly yellow storms, Jude showed the ring's magic circle as he said, "Let's refrain from talking about mutually assured destruction, okay? Chi, you're not even a wizard." He was a martial arts fighter by profession, but if Jude could use magic like an ordinary wizard, it would be a slap to the cheek for Cordelia. What is the second effect? When the rings are close together, the built-in magic becomes stronger. Mine is recovery magic, and yours is defense magic. When we are close to each other, it overlaps with the first effect, which greatly enhances its power. Cordelia looked at the ring and found the built-in shield, magic in the ring. What do you think? It's faithful to the concept of rings, right? Yeah. The effect is stronger when it's worn by each other, and its performance improves when we're together. These strangely cute magic effects were precisely made by Count Chase himself. Why? No, I just had a little rude thought. In front of Cordelia, who tilted her head while wondering what he was talking about, Jude recalled Count Chase's stern face, and after taking several deep breaths, he was able to regain his calmness. Well, that's it for our harvest inspection, so let's move on to our operational meeting. You mean the way to the witch's forest? That's right, it's both in the north, but if we go straight to Count H.R. Svelga, we won't pass by the witch's forest, so we need to create a reason. Moreover, monsters even appeared in the witch's forest. We needed a pretty much good reason to convince the escorts who'd make the safety of our journey to Count H.R. Svelga's territory their top priority. So what do you have in mind? Seeing that you're talking about it at this point, don't you already have a plan? Cordelia was already familiar with Jude, even before they came to Pleiades. Jude wasn't a person who'd bring up a story like this without having any plans. Indeed, he had a plan, so Jude grinned and answered. Of course I have. Do you remember what I told you during our last information exchange meeting? The story of playing another card to draw a big picture. Yes, the time has come for a new Mew and sweet water. It would be a new all-around excuse, medicine following Gumjal. A dark smile was drawn on Jude's face. Did the Fairy Queen say that? Yes, the Fairy Queen said that. The Witch's Forest has an influential connection that will benefit Cordelia, so make sure to stop by if you need to go to the north. When Jude spoke with a very serious face, Lucas turned to Cordelia and she nodded while having the same serious face as Jude. I'm serious, Lord Lucas. It was indeed true that there was an event for Cordelia in the Witch's Forest. What are they going to do if we said the Fairy Queen said that? Are they going to check it? By what means? It was what Jude had said last night. Jude and Cordelia met the Fairy Queen. It was certainly true, and the moonlight proved it. No one else can meet the Fairy Queen. In the first place, the reason why the Fairy Queen's night banquet was an exclusive event for Cordelia was simple. The fairies invited Cordelia to their night banquet because they found her incredibly pretty and admirable. Sylvia is the only other person we've met who has the potential to. You need to have a beautiful girl, go to a fixed date, a fixed time, and a fixed place to take a bath. Lucas and our party knew nothing about the date, time, and place, so there was no way for them to check even if they wanted to. And we're going to add something extra here. You know Lucas' character settings, right? A heroic novel enthusiast. He is a young 16-year-old boy who wants to live a life like the heroes in novels. When I close my eyes even now, the day I met the Fairy Queen vividly comes to my mind. It was a really fantastic and beautiful night. As Jude spoke with his eyes closed, Cordelia continued, covering her mouth with both hands. It's a memory I'll never forget. It was true. It was a really crazy night where we got harassed by dozens of fairies. Even now, Cordelia breaks into cold sweat when she closes her eyes and thinks of that time. All right, it's coming across to him. Jude slightly opened his eyes and peeked into Lucas' eyes that became filled with various emotions. Meeting a mysterious entity like the Fairy Queen was one of the classic situations in hero novels. Maybe we can have a similar experience this time. That's right, the Fairy Queen said it on purpose, so I'm sure we'll have a mysterious experience. It was something like meeting the soul of a witch, so it was bound to be mysterious. Although Cordelia's acting ability was at the level of reading Korean books, her acting was more natural than usual, because what they were talking about was a fact in the first place. We may have to fight monsters like when we fought the bighorn, but that's also part of the adventure. Oh my, I'm scared, Mr. Bayer. It's okay, Lady Cordelia. If anything happens, I'll risk my life to protect you. Lord Lucas will also be with us. A knight protecting a beautiful lady. Looking at Cordelia being scared but at the same time, looking forward to it, Lucas inhaled and swallowed his breath for a moment. Lucas had already witnessed Cordelia's true colors the other day, but even taking that into consideration, the current Cordelia is, to be precise, her pitiful yet incomparably beautiful appearance certainly had a tremendous power. It's only natural that it's a knight's mission to protect the lady. When they saw the corner of Lucas' mouth slightly raise as he politely answered, Jude and Cordelia thought at the same time. That's something he had always wanted to say. It's a wish he wanted to achieve, a wish fulfillment. The two exchanged glances and gave the final blow. Lord Lucas, a heart-pounding adventure awaits us. I'm getting excited because it's like a heroic novel. Let's go through the witch's forest. Let's enjoy the adventure the Fairy Queen presented us. Lucas swallowed deeply again. Jude and Cordelia. They're two people who have already experienced a story-like adventure, such as defeating the bighorn and meeting the Fairy Queen. These two were now reaching out for a new adventure. It was too much of a temptation to refuse. That, wouldn't it be dangerous? It'll be fine if we have escorts, and I guess a little risk is the real taste of adventure. A little risk is the real taste of adventure is a frequent line from the novel, built between the hero. Eventually, Lucas nodded with flushed cheeks. Okay, let's go through the witch's forest for Lady Cordelia. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lord Lucas. An exciting adventure awaits us. Cordelia made quite an unusual, impressive performance, perhaps because she was influenced by the atmosphere. And she wasn't the only one who got into the mood. Lucas' cheeks twitched at the word adventure once again, and he suddenly stood up from his seat as he said, I'll be back after talking to my escorts. Both of you should also talk to your escorts. Okay. I'll be going then. As Lucas left his seat in a hurry, Jude and Cordelia exchanged looks before cheerfully bumping their fists together. Chapter 29, Episode 29, Witch's Forest, 2. Terms used in this chapter. Nuna, Korean term on how younger boys address their older sister, or a female older than them. Cordelia uses it to address herself as she is older than Lucas. Trafalgar, this is a reference to Trafalgar, which is an actual place. I don't know if the author misspelled Trafalgar, or if it was a deliberate misspelling, because many people get the spelling of the place wrong too. The Witch's Forest's official name was Trafalgar Forest, a region belonging to a northern viscount, and is located in the northwest of Lancaster. However, no one really manages it. The forest was an important place, beyond one's imagination. It was a place where you could get firewood as well as food. Therefore, most lords that have forests in their territory manage it by hiring forest rangers. However, half of Trafalgar Forest was no different from an abandoned forest. Because monsters come out of the forest. There was a clear difference between monsters and wild beasts, such as bears and wild boars, though they were all dangerous. Enmity against humans. Most monsters hated humans. Rather than for any specific reason, it was simply just an instinctive hostility. Moreover, most monsters were smarter than the wild beasts. Even goblins, the epitome of the weak monsters that can be found anywhere on the continent, knew how to use their brains in a clever way, such as digging traps and launching surprise attacks with a group. It's okay to go to the outskirts of the Trafalgar Forest. However, it's dangerous to go deep into the place called the Witch's Forest. Frankly, I don't like it. When he heard that we were going to pass through the witch's forest, Sir Sion, a handsome knight of Count H.R. Svelga, frowned. Now in his early 30s, he was the strongest and highest-ranking knight among Luca's escorts, and had taken the role of leading the escorts from the three counts for their journey to Count H.R. Svelga's territory. If he objected, it would be impossible to go through the witch's forest, no matter how much Lucas wanted to. Lucas was only Sir Sion's escort target, and not his master, Count H.R. Svelga. But Sir Sion... Yes, I understand. If the Fairy Queen said we had to stop by, then there must be a good reason. When Sir Sion spoke with a bitter smile, Luca's restless face brightened up a little. Sir Sion, then. All right, let's go through it. However, there will be conditions. Condition? You shouldn't be at the forefront. Basically, the young master should bear in mind that you are being escorted. Do you understand? I understand. Lucas answered reluctantly, and Sir Sion smiled and continued to talk while drawing his face a little closer. And there's one more condition. One more? Yes, please protect Count Chase's esteemed daughter like a courageous and honorable knight. Of course, you shouldn't take the role of Mr. Jude Bayer too much. Do you understand? When Sir Sion gave a little wink at the end, Lucas' face brightened at once. Okay, I promise. I believe you, young master. Sir Sion patted Lucas' shoulder as if treating him like a younger brother and straightened his lowered posture. On the other hand, Lucas turned around with a bright smile and hurriedly ran towards Jude and Cordelia, who were standing at a distance. He looked so innocent while running. Dame Thillian, a murky blonde-haired female knight and adjutant of Sir Sion, spoke with a frown, and Sir Sion replied with a bitter smile. He's at that age. Well, I first killed someone when I was 15 years old. My first experience was younger. Why are you comparing based on misfortune? You are different from him. As Sir Sion, a former mercenary, looked back at Dame Thillian, she looked away and said, It's because I'm worried. I know, you may talk tough, but you care about young Master Lucas just as much as we do. If Cordelia was the youngest and loved by everyone in Count Chase's family, Lucas was the only child born to Count H.R. Svelga, who didn't have a child for a long time since he got married. He was also a precious child born with a tremendous talent for the sword. It was not an exaggeration to say that among the people of H.R. Svelga, there was no one who didn't cherish and love Lucas. He's finally making friends his age, isn't that good? What if it becomes a sticky love triangle? Well, our young master is a little attractive. Sir Sion began to boast about their young master, but it was fine since there were only knights of Count H.R. Svelga gathered near them, who also shared similar thoughts with him. Dame Thillian also nodded with a serious face, and glanced at her beloved and innocent young master, who was with Jude and Cordelia. Since the short trip to Langesthay had turned into a journey towards the northernmost end of the Len Kingdom, there had been a considerable change in the composition of the escorts. First of all, Marja, Jude's exclusive maid, was not included in the party. I'd like to go with you if possible, but... No, go back home, Marja. Your skin has already become rough, right? Young master, that's... At Jude's will, Marja eventually lost her stubbornness and returned to Count Bayer's territory with Gar-El. Because it's too dangerous. It wasn't just the witch's forest. If they planned to follow the main story's flow, it was not an exaggeration to say that the party's future lies on a path of thorns. It was unreasonable for Marja, who was not a knight, to be with them. Should I call the rest as numerical reinforcements? There are 3 knights from Count Bayer and 1 squire who will do the chores. There are 3 knights from Count Chase, which included Dahlia. There are 5 knights from Count H.R. Svelga and 2 squires. An ordinary knight can be compared to 10 infantrymen, so in terms of combat power, a powerful convoy of more than 100 infantrymen was formed. I plan to use the carriage until we get near the Northern Territory, and then walk on foot from the Trafalgar Forest. The carriages will be sent separately to the Northern Territory. After completing our adventure, we should give our greetings to the Northern Viscount. Yes, I stopped by on my way to Langesthay, and he was a kind and nice man. No Northern lord would stay still if a child from the 12 Northern families passed by their territory. The children of the 12 families also had to meet the Lord in order to be polite, except for times when they had some pressing and urgent matters. You explicitly emphasized the word, adventure. Cordelia stared at Jude suspiciously, while Jude responded to Lucas, who was explaining their schedule with a bright face. Should I say that my suspicion about Outboxer 009's job is getting deeper day by day? Well, I'm an accomplice now. Cordelia's lips pouted, and soon she smiled and began supporting Jude. It's a little scary that monsters will come out, but it's reassuring when I think that Mr. Jude Baer and Lord Lucas is here. Ha ha ha, don't worry, I won't let them touch even a single fingertip of Lady Cordelia. Ha, have you not seen Cordelia fighting Minos back then? Cordelia was capable even if she had only supported them from the rear back then. After swallowing the few questions he had in his mind, Jude took a deep breath and started talking about what was necessary. Lord Lucas, it's very important to have information before going on an adventure. We have to figure out in advance where we are going, what kind of place, what enemies will come out, and what are their strengths and weaknesses. Jude had very much felt responsible for Lucas because he had tricked him. Even though Lucas was a sword genius, he was still a young and innocent 16-year-old boy. Well, that's what I learned. It was another similar phrase that appeared in Between the Hero. Jude looked back at Cordelia and continued his words. In the witch's forest, a poor witch's soul is sealed. An evil being is suppressing the witch's soul. The fairy queen said she wished to set the witch free. Such a secret story. Like a story that would only appear in hero novels, Lucas naturally admired it as he completely got sucked in by Jude's story. And that story now was becoming true. While listening to Jude's story, Cordelia briefly recalled Cordelia's main story. After she was obviously kidnapped and managed to run away, Cordelia desperately escaped through a gap that the Devil's Hand's guard had neglected, and she wanders through the Trafalgar Forest. Cordelia was not only chased by the Devil's Hand's pursuers, but also by the monsters living in the forest. She had frequent brushes with death, and when her mind and body finally reached their limits, she heard the witch's voice. The evil being was surely Asmodeus' subordinate, right? Asmodeus was the monarch of lust, and one of the 5 great demons in hell. As one of the enemies in the entire Legend of Heroes series, he was one of the greatest demons that could only be dealt with in Legend of Heroes 3. In any case, the summary was as follows. The witch's soul is sealed, and Asmodeus' subordinate, a white-eyed demonic monster, is guarding the seal. With the guidance of the witch's soul, the seal is released. The liberated witch's soul defeats the monster, and Cordelia gets the witch's power from the witch's soul afterwards. Although she wasn't as good as Jude in remembering all the story's lines, Cordelia still had an accurate understanding of the game's story. But I still have to be careful. Well, the battle with monsters was inevitable, and as this was not a game but reality, so it was possible that other variables could appear. Cordelia raised her head as she listened to Jude's story. She clenched her fist when she saw Lucas. Nunar will protect you. Like Jude, Cordelia also felt responsible for Lucas. I'm really looking forward to it. Lucas smiled naively, and Jude and Cordelia looked at each other. The two exchanged glances of guilt and responsibility. The journey to Trafalgar Forest was smooth, and not much changed after entering the witch's forest. It's a little different from what I imagined. When Lucas spoke quietly, Jude and Cordelia exchanged bitter smiles. The current situation was different from the thrilling adventure that Lucas imagined. There are 11 knights. If you include the squires, it becomes 14. Whether it was a wild beast or monster, they at least possessed basic intelligence. 14 armed personnel were moving forward with a threatening atmosphere, so only a few ones were dumb and reckless enough to attack first. Very often, unlucky and stupid ones like the forest goblin appeared, but they were cut down instantly. It's peaceful. In the original Cordelia's story, the forest was like hell. Everything was hard for Cordelia, who was injured and exhausted from running away. Even a single goblin could threaten her life, so she was extremely nervous that a small sound or a glimpse of a shadow could make her heart jump. But now, Jude was surprised at the appearance of Cordelia, who was clenching and opening her fists, so he whispered to her ear. "Hey, what's wrong? Are you feeling sick?" Cordelia frowned at Jude's question and whispered back. Something is missing." It was a vague explanation, but Jude understood it. "You're frustrated. It must be painful for a hunting king to come to the hunting ground and watch other people hunt. Well, this is unexpected, but she's not normal either." What were you thinking? Did you think I'm weird?" "No, not really. Stay still like that." "Huh. Stay still." When Cordelia tilted her head in confusion and stopped walking, Jude loosened the cord from his waist, wound it around her waist, and held the end firmly. "What are you doing? If you suddenly run and leave, I can catch you. You're not allowed to bite anyone." "Shall I bite you first?" It was when Cordelia growled like a dog. "Mr. Jude Bayer, what's going on? Why is Lady Cordelia's waist?" "The fog is getting thicker. When the view is blocked, there is a risk of us being scattered, so we use this to connect each other. If it's fine with Lord Lucas, will you like to join us as well?" "OHIC, yes, I'll tie it up too." Lucas nodded and approached Jude, who quickly tied the cord to his waist and handed the remaining cord to Lucas. Cordelia thought while looking at them. It had an authentic reason. "I thought of the reason for tying the cord. I think I've heard stories that when people climb places like snowy mountains, they use cords to tie themselves and stay connected with each other." Cordelia was alone in the original, but not now. "The fog is thick." The fog that had been up to my ankles at first had now suddenly rose to my waist. When the fog finally came at the top of my head. "Wait!" When Jude, who was in the middle, suddenly stopped, and not only Lucas, who was in the lead, but also Cordelia, had no choice but to stop. Cordelia, whose mind was wandering while walking behind them, hit her forehead on Jude's back. She then asked while touching her forehead. "Why? The soil has changed." "What?" Instead of answering, Jude turned the soil and showed it to them. He sat down, rubbed the soil, and explained to Lucas and Cordelia, who came close to him. The soil had changed. The smell, particle size, and the composition are different from the soil of Trafalgar Forest. At Jude's sudden words, Lucas blinked, and Cordelia sat down too and touched the soil, but she couldn't tell the difference. She didn't even know what the soil of the Trafalgar Forest was like in the first place. "Dahlia, John!" Jude suddenly shouted loudly, but no one answered back. Lucas flinched and also called the names of Sion and Thilian, but it was the same too. Cordelia realized at that moment. I was too relaxed. I didn't even think of the escorts until Jude cried out. They had just walked without thinking, even though they lost sight of their escorts. Barrier. It was an independent space, like the dungeon book. The story fell into place. The knights that suddenly disappeared. A completely different soil composition. If they hadn't tied each other with a cord, not only Lucas, but Jude and Cordelia would also have been scattered. Cordelia quickly turned to Jude, and he nodded. "This is certainly a barrier." It was the same as the original, but also different. In the original, Cordelia wandered through the forest alone, so she didn't even notice the existence of a barrier. But it wasn't for the party. Several people were heading straight towards the target without wandering through the forest. That was what made the difference. And perhaps it was a change due to the butterfly effect that occurred as a result of stopping the Devil's Hand's attack. "Mr. Bayer, Lady Cordelia." When Lucas asked with a tense face, Jude took a deep breath and stood up. He told Lucas and everyone to untie the cords that were tied to their waists, as they had already entered the barrier. "Lord Lucas." "Yes, Mr. Bayer." "It seems like a real adventure has started." A real adventure where they had no idea of the outcome and process. Tension, anxiety, indescribable joy and anticipation spread simultaneously on Lucas' face, and Jude and Cordelia looked back at each other. Amidst their concerns and responsibilities, they were prepared to fight. Chapter 30, Episode 30, which is Forest 3. Terms used in this chapter. Owlbear, a fictional creature originally created for the Dungeons & Dragons fantasy role-playing game. It is depicted as a cross between a bear and an owl, which hugs like a bear and attacks with its beak. Weabor, a fictional creature capable of polymorphing into a boar-humanoid hybrid, or into a boar, or back into its true form, which is humanoid. When moving in groups, it was very important to have a proper line and formation. Jude spoke, looking at Lucas and Cordelia. "I'll take the lead. Lady Cordelia will be in the middle, and last will be Lord Lucas." At Jude's words that he would be at the front line, Cordelia exclaimed an ooh in admiration, but Lucas had a slightly dissatisfied look. "Mr. Bayer, me too. It's not because I see Lord Lucas as someone to protect. I entrusted the rear to you, as it is as important as the front." "It's the rear?" "Yes, we are in a place where we don't know where the enemy will come from. The rear is as important as the front. Please protect Lady Cordelia by keeping an eye on the back." "Okay, leave it to me." Lucas nodded with a serious face. Although he was excited that it was a real adventure, Lucas realized the seriousness of the situation after listening to Jude's explanation. Maybe the other knights are also wandering inside the barrier. The best way to overcome the current situation is to free the witch's soul. The witch's soul dispels the barrier. Probably. Because of the emergency situation, Cordelia's usual way of speaking re-emerged. Jude briefly responded and then spoke to Lucas again. "First of all, we're going to keep moving in the same direction. We may have entered the barrier, but it's possible that the way itself remains the same." "Yes, I understand." Lucas energetically answered and immediately drew his sword and prepared to enter into battle. After swallowing his breath at the sight of Lucas, Jude approached close to Cordelia and said, "Frankly, I don't know the way or where to go. I'll trust in you." "I know, are you talking about the witch's voice?" Cordelia likewise kept their faces close and whispered. The voice of the witch was what helped Cordelia in the original story. While she was wandering through the forest, she heard the witch's voice who guided her on the correct direction. "Keep your ears open." "Okay, I'll keep it wide open. Though about the battle formation, can you change my position?" "I'll let you do other things sooner or later." "HMPH, I'll look forward to it." After they wrapped up and ended their conversation, Cordelia increased her distance from him. Jude put the sun's necklace inside his specialized knuckles and looked through the fog. "Let's get started." Jude slowly proceeded, being wary of his surroundings, and Cordelia and Lucas followed Jude's footsteps with 3 steps apart between each of them. "How far have they gone?" They took a short break when Jude stopped under a large tree. For some reason, despite being in the middle of the forest, the gap between the trees was very far. "I'll take a look at the surrounding environment for a moment." Jude spoke in a low voice as he began to carefully observe the soil on the ground or the trees nearby. And Cordelia thought at that time, "What did you do?" His observation of the surrounding environment was strange. Frankly, Cordelia couldn't figure out how Jude did it. It was the same when he said the soil has changed. In other words, when we first entered the forest, he was already observing the soil, which was unthinkable for Cordelia. What did you really do in the past? Not to mention the fact that he noticed that the soil has changed while walking. Even if he was number 1 in the server rankings, his actions were already impossible to explain in words. There is something about him. It was not an exaggeration to say that his memory had exceeded the normal limits. He thought differently than ordinary people and had excellent acting skills. In addition to this, he even had great observation skills. "It smells suspicious." It was when Cordelia sniffed once for no reason. "Lady Cordelia." Yes." A startled Cordelia turned her head and saw Lucas. But somehow she felt unpleasant with his smile. "Lord Lucas." Sorry, Lady Cordelia's gaze on Mr. Bayer was so touching. It was such a profound love. I wanted to experience that kind of love too. When Lucas' face turned slightly red, as if he was really envious, Cordelia thought, "What is this crazy bastard saying?" Fortunately, the situation was not as urgent as it was in the fight against Minos, so it was possible to prevent the words from coming out of her mouth. Food ho 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 I, is that so? Cordelia barely stopped the swear word from coming out and laughed gracefully, while Lucas wiped his nose in embarrassment. It was at that moment. Cordelia, who was laughing awkwardly, suddenly stood up. Lucas looked around sharply too, though he was slow by one beat. The air has changed. To be exact, they felt piercing sharp gazes directed towards them. Lady Cordelia. Instead of responding to Lucas' call, Cordelia grabbed the moonlight with both hands and shouted, "Jude!" The piercing gazes were in front of him. There was a rattling sound that could be heard from the thick fog. It was not one, but many. Let me think, let's remember. In the original story, there were quite a few monsters that Cordelia met when she wandered through the witch's forest. In the forest outskirts, it was mainly forest goblins. Deep in the forest, it was savage beasts like the owlbear and wereboar, which one must consider fleeing unconditionally when facing them, and in the vicinity of the seal. Skeleton. The power of the seal holding the witch's soul was not weak. Containing the power of Asmodeus, the monarch of lust, it affected not only the witch's soul but also the surrounding area. Because of this, death was no longer an eternal rest in the depths of the witch's forest. Those who have died here were reborn as undead monsters. Lucas, sheathe your sword. Hitting is more effective on skeletons. As Cordelia quickly shouted, Lucas hastily returned his sword to the scabbard, despite his surprise. The skeletons finally appeared. 8. It wasn't a small number. The tottering skeletons were wearing worn-out white clothes that was strangely familiar. What was it like this in the original? Cordelia clenched her teeth in worry. The Guardians. Jude suddenly came to her side and said, "The Guardians of the Holy Cross." They were a group of humans who fought against the demons and were influential across the whole Legend of Heroes series. If you think of the past broadly, the Paladin Gallus and Solari's priests, who sealed the great demon Lysagang, were also Guardian members. Considering the situation, it was highly likely that they entered the forest to destroy Asmodeus' subordinate, died and became undead. The Guardians, then. There should be one more. The Guardians of the Holy Cross moved as a group of 9 people. And as if answering Jude and Cordelia, a new skeleton appeared behind the back of the scattered skeletons. Likewise, it was wearing worn-out clothes, but the skeleton was also wearing a distinctive robe with the Guardians of the Holy Cross emblem. It was probably the leader of the group. "Mr. Bayer, they are," Lucas fully shouted in a tense voice. This is because the skeletons that appeared began to form a battle formation. The Guardian Extermination Formation. It was the Guardian's most basic battle formation, created for the purpose of all-out battle. Moreover, as if it couldn't get any worse, a red battle aura began to emerge in their hands. They may have become undead monsters, but it seemed that they could still use the Guardian's skills. F***CK. Cordelia finally let out a curse and swallowed deeply, and Jude quickly said, "Their pattern is simple, tie them down with Lucas, I'll deal with the boss." In the Guardian Extermination Formation, 8 would take the form of a defensive fortress, and the leader would strike the enemy by moving inside and outside the battle formation. Therefore, in order to break down the battle formation, we had to tear apart the leader from the Guardian Extermination Formation. Cordelia was convinced by Jude's explanation. It was a theoretically perfect plan. However, there was always a gap between theory and reality. "Hey, wait a second." Cordelia shouted in a hurry, but Jude had already kicked the ground. The skeletons in the Guardian Extermination Formation slowly marched forward, and the leader went out of the formation, as if chasing Jude, and kicked the ground in the same way. "You evil bastard, am I you? I'm not you. The pattern is simple. If you know the pattern, you can easily break it. I'm not you who memorized everything." There were numerous monsters in Legend of Heroes too, so their patterns that naturally appeared numbered in the hundreds to the ridiculous 1,000 mark. Who else but Outboxer can memorize all those patterns? La Lady Cordelia. Here it comes, stay where you are. Cordelia shouted reflexively as she stamped on the floor with moonlight while invoking the spell. She first spread grease magic in a wide area to prevent the enemies from directly approaching, and then shouted to Lucas again. "Start from the right, up, up, down." "Yes." Lucas shouted in confusion, but he wasn't a sword genius for nothing. As if avoiding the grease magic that Cordelia had spread, he completely evaded the pressing attacks of the skeletons. "Seriously? Up, ups, down. Front, front, rear." The 3 skeletons attacked one after another just as what Cordelia said. "Lady Cordelia. This time it's on my side, middle, middle, down." Cordelia casted haste magic on herself and then quickly moved to widen her distance from Lucas. It was to avoid being surrounded. How did I memorize this? Cordelia soon realized it. Her head doesn't know, but her body knows. It was hard to say that her body knew because she had reincarnated, but somehow, the subconscious of Cordelia, who had gone through hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of hunting as Yellow Storm, remembered the pattern of the Guardian extermination formation. Lady Cordelia. Middle, up, down, middle, at the same time. Cordelia, who shouted reflexively, did not try to use her memory. She left her body to her hunting instincts as she said the words out of her mouth. Up, ups, down. Thump. As if piercing through Cordelia's loud voice, Jude struck the ground hard. Looking at the leader skeleton rushing from the front, he thought with his head instead of his instinct. Monk Guardian Leader, the grade is low in terms of color, maybe 7th grade, if so it can use God's Fist. The monk martial arts belong to the immediate higher level of the basic Guardian skills that one must learn to be officially recognized as a monk of the Guardian Corps. Just as 36 world steps can reach 9 celestial steps after several rank-ups, monks start from the basics too as they improve and reach higher levels of martial arts skills, such as God's Fist. Because it had become an undead, its sacred battle aura has weakened. Mana Inukai, sacred battle aura. All of them were similar concepts in the end, but there was a slight difference. Sacred battle aura is the addition of the life force to the Inukai. Therefore, it was not a power that undead monsters could properly handle. The monk had forcibly used fighting spirit as a substitute for life force, but it was clear that it would not be as powerful compared to using life force. Moreover, the monk had no blood or flesh now. The movement of its sacred battle aura could be seen over its pale bones. Thump, thump, thump. Jude's footsteps hit the ground in succession. There wasn't a set pattern like the Guardian extermination formation, but Jude could completely evade as if he knew all of its attack patterns. Because I can see it. He could see the flow of the sacred battle aura moving along the skeleton's body. That's why he could predict what kind of attack would unfold next. Of course, it was a skill that an ordinary person couldn't pull off whether they saw the flow or not, but it was possible for Outboxer. What's more, he as Jude had something now that he didn't have before. Chun Mudit. The skeleton leader was not weak. Although it was poorly using its sacred battle aura compared to when it was alive, the God's Fist was still quick and accurate. But Jude was also quick. His levels surpassed 20 when they defeated Minos, and his overall physical abilities were also greatly improved. And there was one more added to it. Jude didn't simply stop at avoiding attacks. He also didn't stop in thinking of the next attack naturally. Chun Mudit, a heavenly talent for martial arts. Tsuei Chwak. The flames of a pure white sacred battle aura rose from Jude's fist. Sacred battle aura. It was the addition of the life force that everyone has to the Inukai. He figured it out from watching the movement of the sacred battle aura. At some point, how to use the sacred battle aura naturally came to his mind. And the result was, Jude held his breath. He could see the sacred battle aura of the skeleton rushing from his front. He moved the center of his body as he felt the trajectory of the skeleton's attack. Chiuwak. The skeleton's fist pierced the air. The sound of the strike was heard, and Jude, who dodged the attack, clenched his fist. He drew a picture on his head. The attacks the skeleton leader unfolded several times. The unhidden flow of sacred battle aura that that he saw several times. All of it became one, as everything naturally connected in his mind. And that's why Jude was able to unfold his next attack. God's Fist. The Holy Cross Punch. On Jude's fist, a pure white sacred battle aura took the form of a cross. With a violent hitting sound, the skeleton leader's chest was crushed. Chapter 31, Episode 31, which is Forest 4. Terms used in this chapter. Zhuge Liang, a famous Chinese strategist during the Three Kingdoms period. He is recognized as the greatest and most accomplished strategist of his era, and has been compared to another great ancient Chinese strategist, Sun Tzu. Li Mu, a prominent military general during the Warring States period of Chinese history. He was named by Chinese historians as one of the 4 greatest generals of the Warring States period. The pure white cross burst into light. The skeleton leader's ribs and spine shattered, and it fell and collapsed. Jude kept his punching posture for a while before his arms slumped down. Holy Cross Punch was one of the skills of God's Fist, and as its name suggests, the sacred battle aura takes the shape of a cross that directly hits the enemy with a powerful punch. After taking a comfortable posture, Jude's rough breathing continued. Though he had improved his body with continuous level-ups, the technique still used in Akai that caused a burden on his body. His body still had a lot of small and narrow meridians that were blocked. But it paid off. It wasn't just the white ring of light that surrounded his body. There was also the God's Fist and the Holy Cross Punch. The remnants of the sacred battle aura scattered in the air as Jude happily smiled and turned to Cordelia. As he expected, Cordelia's side was almost finished as well. Break away, defend, penetrate the core. Cordelia issued rapid-fire commands before gliding on the ground. It wasn't an ordinary move. She slipped between the skeletons without any hesitation and swung the moonlight enchanted by a strike magic to smash their neck bones. With her actions, the battle formation was destroyed. This is because, as Cordelia herself said, she penetrated the core of the Guardian Extermination formation. Lucas, who quickly understood Cordelia's commands and guided the skeletons towards himself, cheered with a bright face. There were already 3 skeletons that had fallen down to his sheathed sword. Let's finish this. Cordelia refreshingly smiled as she glided on the ground again. She was like a figure skater that swiftly glided smoothly on the ice. She's really Yellow Storm. Instead of running to help, Jude admired the sight as he stretched his arms. Cordelia's movement right now wasn't just an ordinary move. You're using haste, magic to move on a floor applied with grease magic. It was generally not possible. Grease is a magic that causes one to fall on their back, and not a magic that is used to glide like it was ice. But Cordelia could pull it off. She's like a real wild animal sometimes. If Jude was the type who handled everything through calculations and thinking, Cordelia was the type who entrusted her body to instinct. That phenomenal movement was the result of acting according to her instincts, and not because of thinking. It's the end. Cordelia moved among the skeletons as if she was dancing and swung the moonlight like a baseball bat. The skeleton's lower backbones were smashed, and it fell and collapsed on its back. Ooh, that was amazing, Lady Cordelia. As Lucas admired her and Cordelia laughed while making a V-sign with her fingers, Jude suddenly smiled as he recalled an old event. It's understandable why the guild leaders don't like her. Yellow Storm was a disaster itself in massive battles between guilds. Damn it, I can't predict how it'll move. It was a natural reaction. Once she entered the battle, Yellow Storm didn't do what the others were thinking. Could it possibly be a genius, or else how can it show up like that? There was no knowing when, where, or what she'll do, but strangely, Yellow Storm always appeared in times of need. It was basic of her to stab the enemy's sore spot, and as she had just showed in the battle against the skeletons, she was also good at destroying the enemy's camp itself by penetrating the core of the formation. Therefore, people unfamiliar with Yellow Storm thought of her as a genius tactician. She was like Zhuge Liang and Li Mu, who could see the entire battlefield at a glance and get in the way of their enemies. But Jude knew the truth. It's just a feeling. The words that Yellow Storm spoke in her battle earlier. She simply did it without thinking. Yellow Storm was not the type to stab the enemy's sore spots by using high-level tactical thinking. How do I say it? I just do what I feel like I should. It was literally a feeling or sense. She feels like she have to do that somehow. At first, Jude thought that Yellow Storm was lying. However, after spending a long time with her, he finally understood it in the end. It's instinct. Yellow Storm was a genius. She was a genius in the side of battle sense feeling, and not on the intelligence side. She didn't calculate the ever-changing situation of the battlefield, she just understood instinctively. And the result was what was shown. What she should do. Where she should attack. Plus one more talent of hers. The reason why Yellow Storm engraved her existence as a true human storm, and her unique ability that even Jude couldn't imitate. Incredible spatial perception and multitasking. Normally, in Legend of Heroes 2, the highest level mage could generally use around 20 to 50 magic spells at the same time. But Yellow Storm was different. 274. It was the highest record of the number of magic spells that Yellow Storm could use at the same time. She advanced alone with hundreds of magic shots at the same time, making her known as a human storm indeed. She wiped the guild units from the hunting ground by herself, and even smashed the guild alone. Well, I'm still first place though. Jude ended his thoughts with a grin as he looked straight ahead again. He saw Cordelia run to Lucas and push her palm out. High five. Huh. High five. As Cordelia waved her hand again, Lucas blinked and soon raised his hand timidly and high-fived with Cordelia. As expected of Lucas, good job, truly a sword genius, the best. Ahem, Lady Cordelia was amazing too. It was unexpectedly impressive. Lucas said with a slight blush in his cheeks. It was also because of Cordelia, but his heart was pounding at the high five itself. There is a similar scene in Between the Hero. Nodding his head alone, Jude approached the two teenagers who were so excited that they were jumping around. It looks like the battle's over. Yes, I think it's over too, Mr. Bear. Ho ho ho. Cordelia said as she pretended to be coy when she saw Jude's face and read his thoughts. At a sudden change in tone, Lucas smiled and turned his eyes away, as if he deliberately didn't know Cordelia flirting with Jude. Lord Lucas, are you hurt anywhere? I'm okay, thanks to Lady Cordelia. I'm afraid to say this, but I'm glad that the other side were the guardians of the Holy Cross. At Jude's words, Lucas blinked his eyes, and soon widely opened them as he asked back. You mean the guardians of the Holy Cross, the ones that protect the continent in the shadows? Yes, the clothes that the skeletons were wearing, and more than anything, the Guardian Extermination Formation itself were all proof of that. Jude answered calmly and placed his hand on Cordelia's shoulder, who decided to shut her mouth tightly instead of interrupting him. Count Chase had a bit of connection with the Guardians of the Holy Cross. Thanks to that, Cordelia and I were able to learn about it. Guardian Extermination Formation. Yes, it's the most basic battle formation used by the Guardians of the Holy Cross. It's not comparable to Count H.R. Svelga's Sage King's Cross, but it's a very sturdy formation. Right, Lady Cordelia? Oh yes, it is. Cordelia smiled awkwardly and nodded. With her clear smile, she looked like a completely different person than when she swung the moonlight. Whatever the circumstances, it seems that a group of Guardians became undead monsters after they were trapped in the barrier. The Guardians became undead monsters. Is it the power of the barrier? Lucas asked with a slightly frightened face, and Jude nodded slowly. It's highly likely, but don't worry too much. If we find the witch's seal and break the seal, everything will be fine. When Jude answered softly, Lucas nodded with a stiff face, and soon made another expression. Let's handle this like an adult. To Lucas, Jude had acted like the reliable Sir Sion, even though he was only a year older than him. So in order to be a good rival, Lucas himself thought that he had to look mature. But it was only for a while. Lucas suddenly frowned, as he looked back at the destroyed skeletons and said, "Mr. Bayer, Lady Cordelia, it may be a little unreasonable, but I'd like to ask the two of you a favor." "What is it?" "Can we bury them, if they are members of the Guardians of the Holy Cross, who have worked hard for the peace of the continent? Leaving them like this is a little." Somehow, Cordelia agreed with Lucas' words. "With dig magic, I can easily make a pit. How about making a large common grave?" She was talking to Lucas, but her gaze was on Jude. Jude looked at her and nodded. "I agree. I also think that it's not right for the members of the Guardians of the Holy Cross to be left in such a place." "Mr. Bayer, Lady Cordelia, thank you very much." Lucas smiled brightly as he quickly put away his sword and began gathering the skeleton's remains. "I'll look for a place," Cordelia briefly said as she looked around, and soon settled down in a place that seemed to be okay and fired her dig magic. After a dozen minutes, the group buried the skeletons in one place and erected a tombstone with a sword. They then had a brief moment of silence as they remembered the dead. "May the blessing of the Holy Spirit be with you." It was the brief moment after Jude recited a prayer in silence. Lucas sighed in admiration. Blue lights had risen like fireflies from the grave of the Guardians of the Holy Cross. Cordelia unconsciously spoke. "There are 9. It was a group of lights with the same number as the Guardians of the Holy Cross buried in the grave. As if greeting them, the group of lights circled in front of Jude, Cordelia and Lucas, and then flew towards one place. And after they flew in a circle again, the lights soon scattered and disappeared. The members of the Guardians of the Holy Cross." Lucas was moved by the sight as he muttered quietly. On the other hand, Jude shouted inwardly as he clenched his fist. Bingo! There were no events in the original story where Cordelia fought the Guardians of the Holy Cross who had become undead monsters in the witch's forest, but there were quite a lot of events of a similar kind. It's a cliché that souls who have achieved their wish and can finally rest would tell you where important objects are hidden. In fact, if Lucas didn't come forward first, Jude himself was going to make an offer to do it too. Cordelia must have had a similar idea. "That's great, it turned out really well." When Jude turned to Cordelia, she spoke quietly with a flushed face. It seemed that she was relieved at the soul's fortunate circumstances, seeing that her eyes were slightly red. She would too, because Cordelia didn't actually consider making a grave like Jude did. It was just a skeleton in the game. But this place was reality. There really was a group of the Guardians of the Holy Cross, and they wandered through the witch's forest and became undead monsters. How can she not feel sorry for them? I'm glad. The souls of the Guardians of the Holy Cross have finally found eternal rest." With moist and wet eyes, Cordelia saw the lights scattering away. Meanwhile, Jude cleared his throat, somehow unknowingly became the bad guy who didn't get swept up by the mood. Ahem. Why are you not feeling well?" "No, it's just you are kind, cute, and lovely." "What is this crazy bastard saying? Do you have a fever?" Cordelia frowned in worry, but Jude simply shrugged and tapped the shoulder of Lucas, who was still moved by the sight. "Lord Lucas, the Guardians of the Holy Cross seem to have left their last gift there." "Gift? Indeed, they let us know." With his eyes wide open in wonder, Lucas ran straight to the place where the group of lights had gathered. It was under a big tree with roots that were half exposed, and it seemed like a good place to hide something underneath. "Let's dig." "Yes, Mr. Bayer." Lucas was excited by the hero-like development, and he took the lead in digging up the ground. Soon, a well-sealed wooden box was dug out. Looking at the cross pattern engraved on the box surface, it was clearly an item of the Guardians of the Holy Cross. "Lord Lucas should open it." "May?" "Yes, it was Lord Lucas who offered to make a grave for them, so you should open it." Cordelia recommended it following Jude's statement, so Lucas' cheeks were flushed as he nodded at the two. "Then I will open it." Though it was well sealed, it was simply just a paper seal pasted on the wooden box. Lucas took out a knife and opened the lid after tearing off the paper seal. What came out was a parchment inscribed with a complex formula. It's a technique of the Guardians of the Holy Cross. It's an attack skill that destroys demons. It seems that the guardians of the Holy Cross had come here to repel the demonic hordes that were sealing the witch's soul. Lucas nodded seriously at Jude's explanation, before looking at Cordelia and asking, "Lady Cordelia, can you use it?" "Oh yes, maybe." Honestly, she wasn't confident, but there was also Jude, so she thought that it would somehow work. "There's also a book about the God's Fist. Lord Lucas, can I take this?" "Of course, I use a sword, so I'll pass." When Lucas responded plainly, Jude smiled and took the martial arts book. It wasn't a skill book like the one he got from the dungeon book, but it wouldn't take a long time to learn it because of Jude's memory and his Chinmujich. If the evil energy here is very strong enough to create undead monsters, then it seems that we're moving in the right direction. We'll be able to reach the center of the seal if we walk a little further. It was then when Lucas nodded at Jude's explanation. Wait a second," Cordelia quietly said as she suddenly jumped from her seat and started walking in one direction. And Jude understood why she did so. The voice of the witch. The witch's soul was sealed at the center of the forest. Cordelia turned to Jude as if to answer him. She nodded as her clear blue eyes shined. "I can hear a voice. The call of the witch." Cordelia raised her hand and pointed over the fog. Chapter 32, Episode 32, Witch's Forest, 5. While wandering through the witch's forest, Cordelia hears the voice of the witch and reaches the seal under her guidance. In other words, hearing the voice of the witch was like getting a navigator to their destination. However, Jude frowned unconsciously. It was not because Cordelia found the wrong way or the witch's directions were unclear. Cordelia steadily moved forward, even if she sometimes stopped halfway. Come to the direction of the large tree with exposed roots. A clear and pure voice was echoing in his head, though it was somehow faint. The witch's voice, right? As Jude glanced back at Cordelia, she was looking around and saw a large tree with exposed roots as mentioned. It's correct, but why is Jude himself hearing it too and not just Cordelia? Can you hear it even if it's not necessarily Cordelia? In the original story, Cordelia heard the voice because she was alone. But it didn't seem to be the reason. The whole time Cordelia was looking for the way, Lucas was just standing with a blank expression. For the time being, let's keep this a secret. It was very clear on what would happen if I told them that I could also hear the voice of the witch. Cordelia would be pouting, and Lucas would be feeling gloomy because he was the only one who couldn't hear the voice. This way. Oh, okay. Cordelia had a small smile on her face as she spoke in short words and pointed the direction. She seemed to like the current situation in which she became the main character of the episode, as it was in her nature to like getting attention. Yes, I should hide it. I didn't have to reveal the truth and break that smile. But why am I really hearing it? Is there a separate condition on why I could also hear the witch's voice? What does Jude himself and Cordelia have in common? A characteristic that we do not share with Lucas. Beautiful and handsome. Although Lucas was a handsome man of the manly and gallant type, he couldn't compare to Jude and Cordelia, whose looks are always described as incomparable. Well, no way, right? The witch is not a fairy queen. There must have been something else. Age, memories of the previous life, though if you say this, it doesn't explain why Cordelia hears it in the original story. As I stepped forward while considering these and other hypotheses, the fog began to fade at some point. There's a seal in that cave. Rather than a small and narrow proper entrance, Cordelia had pointed to a crack that had risen from the passage of time. As she explained to Lucas, Jude looked around. He saw the dense trees that have grown more than 10 meters and have completely obscured the sky. Beyond the small rocky mountain where the cave was located, a demonic monster was guarding the seal. We are almost there, though. Now, if we go in and release the seal, it would be the end of the mission. The soul of the witch released from the seal will solve the problem of the monster. Cordelia gets the power of the witch, and I get some of the byproducts. Like the bicorn, the demonic monster will also leave a body. As Jude had a delighted smile, Cordelia looked at him suspiciously as she approached him and said, "You look like a pervert." "Which side?" "Just in many ways." Like always, Cordelia said some silly things before she took the lead and went into the cave. The crack was small and narrow, but there was no problem with Cordelia, whose build was small and slender, and Jude, who was still quite thin. Lucas struggled, but he also somehow passed. "You're almost here, come this way." Upon entering the dark cave, he not only heard the witch's voice, but also saw a bunch of green lights that looked like a group of fireflies appearing in front of them. "This way." It was a small cave, so after walking for a minute or so, a fairly large cavity appeared with huge steel doors on one side, and on the center, the party was able to discover the witch's seal. On a large stone pillar in the center of the cavity was a block of ice that was almost the size of a human being. Inside the ice was the naked body of a beautiful black-haired woman, though it looked blurry. "Children, release my seal. To unlock the seal, we weaken the sealing stones at the corners with holy water and draw a magic circle of unsealing in the center, right? Okay, witch." Yes, how did you know?" When Cordelia answered quickly, the witch responded with a flustered voice. Lucas, who didn't know the conversation of the two, let out an ooh in admiration. Cordelia grinned and then approached Jude and said, "I'll sprinkle the holy water on the sealing stones, so I'll leave the magic circle to you." "Okay, ma'am." Jude and Cordelia had already obtained holy water at Langesthay. Unlike the original story, they didn't have to wander through the forest to collect the things that the witch needed for her rescue. The figure of the magic circle, "Are you a wizard specializing in seals?" The witch didn't even explain what kind of magic circle it was, but Jude was drawing it well already. Instead of answering the witch's question, Jude quickly completed drawing the magic circle. "Next, you already know, right?" Jude and Cordelia replied in actions to the slightly quivering voice of the witch. Jude took Lucas as they withdrew to the outside of the magic circle, and Cordelia drew a knife and wounded her palm. "Ugh!" She groaned with tears in her eyes, clenched her fists, and finally dropped the blood on the magic circle. Blood was needed to get through to the soul. Cordelia's mana was transmitted to the magic circle through the drop of blood, and soon, a bright blue light filled the cavity. And it was at that moment. A terrifying roar came from outside the cave. It was evidently the roar of the demonic monster guarding the seal. The tense Lucas hurriedly pulled out his sword spontaneously, but Jude and Cordelia only focused on the witch's seal. The witch would solve the problem if the seal was released anyway. "Anna Iro!" The witch screamed as if to match the monster's roar. The ice that was sealing her quickly cracked, and the entire cave shook. The sound of the monster's roar grew louder and closer. Cordelia's lips felt dry as she placed her palms directly to the magic circle and poured more mana into it. And finally, the ice that was sealing the witch broke into hundreds of pieces and scattered. Bang! The doors let out a loud noise. The steel doors, which were actually the front doors of the seal, became largely indented. The steel doors couldn't be opened because it was originally intended for sealing, but the demonic monster was now trying to destroy it. Jude recoiled at the deafening roars, but soon braced himself. It flowed similarly in the original story. "It was an excessively long time since I was sealed. Thank you for releasing my seal, children." The witch's voice was clearly heard through the banging sounds of the doors. At the center of the seal, a beautiful woman, whose naked white body was covered by her long black hair, floated in the air. She was in a semi-transparent state because she was a soul, and she looked down at Cordelia affectionately. Bang! The doors let out a loud noise again. Through the dented steel doors, they could see the monster's red eyes. Jude nervously gulped as he recalled the original story. Right after breaking the witch's seal, the witch without a body temporarily descends to Cordelia, defeats the demonic monster, and then clears the barrier. Through Cordelia freeing her by breaking the seal, the witch's soul that was sealed for hundreds of years finally ascended. And Cordelia, who harbored the witch's soul for a while, learns a part of the witch's power called the witch transformation. It was a great scene that most users who played Cordelia remembered, because the production crew gave all their effort to that part by expressing the series of situations into a cinematic video. And now, danger is upon you. Dear child, I'll lend you my strength to get rid of the crisis. It was flowing like the original story. When Cordelia nodded as if she knew, the witch closed her eyes and recited the spell. The demonic monster seemed to be stimulated by the witch's actions and thrashed the steel doors more violently. Bangs, bangs, bang. Just before the steel doors was torn off, the witch's soul was scattered with a green light. At the same time, a green light glowed all over Cordelia's whole body, and her clearly bright red hair turned black. Her sky-blue eyes also became a mysterious green like that of Jude. It was the witch's advent. Now all she had to do was to defeat the demonic monster with the witch's power. However, Cordelia looked at herself and was stunned as she blinked her eyes, and Jude realized it at that moment. He understood what happened. Reproduction of the event. In a broader sense, it was like the bathing event in the valley. In the original story event, the fight to defeat the monster by using the witch's power was expressed in a video. That was why not only Cordelia, but even Jude, missed this detail. She wasn't a witch. Cordelia, who acquired the power of the witch, was supposed to defeat the demonic monster. **CK. So Cordelia understood the situation and was embarrassed. She didn't know how to fight, she didn't know how to exactly use the witch's power. Bang! The steel doors were finally smashed to pieces. 2 crumpled doors were scattered on the floor, and a Asmodeus demonic monster, which looked like a huge red gorilla with horns on its head, came into plain view. Despite being in a crouch position, it was as tall as 4 meters as the monster violently smacked its fists. Cordelia looked at Jude, and he looked back at her. The alone Lucas looked at the two as he grasped his sword tightly. It was an unexpected situation. This time there was no Belastin's magic circle. Neither was it a battlefield that was prepared in advance. But they still had to fight. I believe in you. Jude raised his pure white sacred battle aura as he rushed towards the monster. He used the 36 world steps, and Lucas also added light to his sword with the Sage King's cross sword. I believe in you. I believe that Cordelia can use the witch's power. So she had to find a solution before we get crushed by the monster. Tiro. The monster roared as if the rushing Jude was just an insignificant existence. It kicked the ground, and it seemed like it teleported as it had suddenly appeared in front of Jude, and then swung its fist. Smash! The ground was smashed in one blow. Jude barely avoided the attack by rolling on the floor as he added Solari's power to his knuckles. He then flew towards the broken steel doors, trying to lure the monster to him. Lucas roared loudly to also draw its attention and ran towards the opposite of Jude. The monster kicked the ground again. It attacked on Jude's side again. Cordelia. Jude used 36 world steps again. After narrowly avoiding the monster's fist, he yelled as he struck the monster's arm with the Holy Cross punch. Tiro. The monster shrieked in pain, but its steel-like forearm did not budge. Instead of attacking again, Jude kicked the ground and quickly pulled back. At that moment, Cordelia closed her eyes and tried to focus. She tried to use her instinct, or whatever, to utilize the witch's power. However, it wasn't easy. Although she had closed her eyes to block the view, she was still nervous as she could hear the continuous roars and kept thinking of Jude's current crisis. Please, please. Guide the mana. Use it naturally. It was right at that moment. What, don't you know how to use it? Cordelia heard the small and tranquil voice of the witch, and she opened her eyes. She shouted spontaneously. Tell me. What to do? How to use the power of the witch? Before Jude dies. No, before Jude gets hurt. This is how you use it. The moment the witch spoke, the witch's power moved inside Cordelia's body and soul. Through it, Cordelia understood. She realized it instinctively. She realized how to use the power of the witch. Cordelia's eyes glistened and flashed green. Chapter 33, Episode 33, Witch's Forest 6. Once upon a time, there lived a girl. The child was sold by her parents for 9 copper coins and soon became a sacrifice for summoning demons. However, thanks to the demon's whims, instead of ending up as a handful of blood, she became a slave of the demon. The fate of slaves were harsh. Rest did not exist for those whose souls were captured by the demon. It was their fate to live being manipulated as the demon's plaything, and when they die, to struggle in pain for eternity. And so it was for the girl. That was her destiny. But the girl did not conform to her fate. Instead of bowing down and accepting it, she stood up and eventually changed her fate. She is. I know, I already know this. It was the story of the witch. It was the legend of the witch who started as a demon's slave and ended up subduing the demons. But that wasn't important now. How to use the witch's power was more important than the witch's past. You know this again. The witch spoke in a somewhat sulky voice, so instead of showing to Cordelia her past like a flitting film, she directly manipulated the body and soul of Cordelia to use her power. Cordelia couldn't use the witch's power naturally because it wasn't hers to begin with. Although the original Cordelia acquired and used the witch transformation, it was the future Cordelia and not the present Cordelia. It was like if you want to get a driver's license in the future, you have to learn how to drive first. Moreover, it was not a situation where magic could be used by pressing a single skill button like in the game, so the know how to use the witch's power was necessary. The witch's power moved. The power of the great witch that subdued demons spread throughout Cordelia's body and spirit. Just once, but that was enough. Cordelia instinctively realized how to use the witch's power, and she opened her closed eyes. Jude! At the moment Cordelia shouted and her eyes flashed, an intense green-colored air wave swept through the entire place. The tremendous power not only swept away the monster who tried to attack Jude, but even Jude and Lucas who bounced off too. Oh, dark, Tuarak. Although the monster was greatly pushed back, it managed to hold its ground and yelled in anger. On the other hand, Jude and Lucas couldn't stand their ground and ended up rolling on the floor, especially in the case of Jude, since he was near the wall, he even hit the wall once. Right after her power was released, the seal's area came into the view of Cordelia's shining green eyes. She saw the monster holding its ground and yelling in anger. She saw Lucas using his sword to stand up. And she saw Jude lying on the ground and letting out a painful groan. Cordelia's eyes were filled with rage. She took a step forward and bellowed. How dare you? You hurt Jude. You knocked down Jude. I cannot forgive. I will not forgive you. You actually did that. The witch's voice did not reach Cordelia. Overwhelmed by her rage, she roughly swung her arms and exerted her power once again. It was the witch's power again. A kind of telekinetic power became green smoke and spread out. It became a giant hand and then struck the monster. Turuo. The monster was roughly hit, but it didn't just stand there and do nothing. It turned around in the air and changed directions, kicked the wall and rushed towards Cordelia. Tua. It opened its mouth widely. There was a red flash in its abyss-like mouth, which soon became a huge pillar of light that fired towards Cordelia. Breath. By the time Lucas cried out, Cordelia had already reacted. She largely swung her right hand to make the green smoke strike the monster's chin, which forcibly changed the direction of the breath attack. Buluum. The ceiling was directly hit by the monster's breath attack, and the rocks broke off and fell down, and Cordelia took advantage of it. She swung her left hand and snatched the rocks with green smoke and caused a whirlwind to collide with the monster. Kuzara. The rocks became like blades and cut the whole body of the monster. But it was still standing. The demonic monster's skin was thick, and its eyes still glowed red. Korra. When it roared with its arms wide open, the whirlwind itself was crushed. Die. But Cordelia didn't just watch. When it crushed the whirlwind, she raised her right fist and struck the chest of the roaring monster with green smoke. Buluum. The wall and the monster collided, causing a tremendously loud sound. The impact was so strong that the whole cave shook. Hard. Blood came out of Cordelia's nose. Not only that, but her eyes were bloodshot as tears of blood flowed down. Sweat dripped from Cordelia's whole body. She only used it for a short time, but the witch's power was so powerful that it even hurt Cordelia. Not yet. The witch spoke, and Cordelia knew it too. It couldn't have been defeated with just that attack. In the original story, Cordelia borrowed the power of the witch and created a huge magic spear. She was able to finish the monster only when she had pierced it. Use the Spear of Calamity. Just as the witch spoke, Cordelia took a breath and waited for the witch to tell her the spell. 1 second passed, and then 2 seconds. Tell me, you don't know this too. The moment when Cordelia and the witch's words overlapped. Tuo. The monster with hair over its whole body roared once again and kicked the ground. It narrowed the distance with Cordelia in an instant, as if cutting through space. F***CK. Cordelia roughly released the witch's power. She somehow pulled away from the monster trying to punch her, as she rolled on the floor and distanced herself from it. Magic missile greater than. Cordelia mixed her mana with the witch's power. Thus, the witch's power was added into the magic spell that she usually used. Boom! As if it were a ballista's arrow, a huge magic missile was formed in an instant and was fired towards the monster, creating a massive explosion. Tuhack. However, the backlash of using the spell hit Cordelia. At that moment, she bent her body as blood poured out of her mouth. It's still impossible to use my power as yours. Use my magic, not your magic. The witch's power was not like normal mana. Since the legendary Great Witch's power was originally the power of the demon that she subdued, one had to use the spells that the witch had ingeniously created to properly cast spells. Otherwise, if one uses the witch's power in the usual magic spells as Cordelia did, a backlash would occur. Listen carefully. The witch quickly began to cast the spell, but the monster didn't give her time to do so. Tuo. Thanks to being hit by the magic missile, the monster's hair was scorched and its whole body was covered with blood, but it was still alive. It narrowed the distance at once and tried to smash the barely standing Cordelia as it greatly swung its right arm. Yuzo. Just then Lucas roared and threw his sword. The sword with the power of the Sage King's cross sword flew like a lightning flash and succeeded in grabbing the monster's attention even for a moment. Thud. Jude used his 36 world steps. He desperately ran towards Cordelia and kicked the ground at some point as he hugged Cordelia. But there was not enough time. He tried to escape with Cordelia, but the monster's attack was faster than him. Boom! The monster's hand devastated the ground as it broke from the tremendous force. No! It was when Lucas screamed. Magic missile greater than. The magic spell exploded once again. The monster was struck on its side and staggered as it let out a painful groan, and Lucas was able to see what had happened. On the ground, Cordelia and Jude were entangled together and had collapsed. Cordelia was underneath and had used magic, while Jude breathed a sigh of relief on such Cordelia. Fairy steps. He hugged Cordelia and activated it at the same time, so thanks to it, he was able to completely evade the monster's attack. Tuhack. However, Cordelia vomited blood again. Jude's eyes opened wide in surprise, and the witch's voice came to them. It's her limit. The backlash caused by her unreasonable use of my power is too much. Any more would be dangerous. The witch's tone was soft, but her voice was full of concern. Jude quickly looked at Cordelia, and Cordelia looked back at Jude. At the moment, they made eye contact. Kuzura. The monster stood up while limping, as it roared in anger. Despite having a big wound at its side, it rushed towards Jude and Cordelia. Snowu. Lucas picked up the sword that fell on the ground as he turned towards the monster. Cordelia opened her lips and whispered to Jude. Tuhura. The monster jumped. It quickly passed over Lucas' head and then descended as it punched with its fist. Bang! The shield magic that Cordelia used from Count Chase's ring was shattered at once. The monster that landed on the ground pulled its fist again, and Cordelia saw the monster. Instead of using shield magic again, she raised her middle finger while looking at the monster with her clear blue eyes. Did she give up? Was the last thing that she did was to swear? It wasn't that. When the monster had pulled its fist, Cordelia's hair had returned to its red color. At the same time, Jude, who was on top of Cordelia as if protecting her, suddenly grew his hair quickly. Cordelia laughed with her mouth full of blood. She opened her lips again and said, "Finish it." She realized it the moment their eyes met. The fact that Jude can also hear the witch's voice. So Cordelia acted and handed over the witch's power to Jude. "Yuzo!" Jude loudly shouted as he raised himself. The witch moved her power to Jude, and he straightly activated the Guardians of the Holy Cross technique. "You will get hurt." There would be a strong backlash. But Jude didn't care. He didn't have time to listen to the witch's spell now. The current method was the best for him. Jude's eyes glowed green. The witch's power triggered the technique, and the pure white light burst. Tsuhua, the giant golden cross. It was formed from the pure white light. Jude moved forward and tried to strike the monster to burn its body. Tsuhua. But the monster wasn't pushed out very easily. It exploded its power to counter the golden cross. Dozens of lightning sparks arose as the dark red demonic power collided with the sacred power of the golden cross. Blood flowed down from Jude's mouth. Both of his arms that activated the technique trembled like a leaf, and sweat poured down like rain along his forehead. It was a tense and violent clash. No, little by little, Jude began to be pushed back. The cause was not the technique itself, but rather Jude, who maintained the technique, despite his physical limitations. "No, if this situation continues." The witch groaned, but Jude did not give up. "Because I trusted her. Because I believed in her." Cordelia. When Jude screamed, Cordelia was reflected in the monster's red eyes. Pure white mana was concentrated on the tip of her finger. Magic missile. It was very small and weak, but it was enough to break the balance. Cordelia moved her finger as she smiled in pain. The magic missile that was about the size of a finger flew like an arrow and struck the eyes of the monster. T-Dark. The pain from the attack broke the balance. A crack appeared from the demonic power that the monster was using, and Jude did not miss it. Boom! The monster's scream and the roar caused by the attack burst at the same time. The golden cross promptly pushed back the monster, and the monster flew almost over a dozen meters and crashed into the wall. But that wasn't the end. The golden cross dug into the monster's body. It did not stop burning until it utterly destroyed the monster. Allah! With its last scream, the red glow disappeared from its eyes. Starting from the chest, the monster's whole body was wrapped in a pure white fire, and it soon became ashes that scattered around. As he watched the whole scene of the monster burning, Jude thought that he was only breathing roughly, but he soon vomited blood just like Cordelia. Unlike Cordelia, Jude had a poor compatibility with the witch's power. He had only used it once, but his condition was as bad as Cordelia, who had used the witch's power several times. "I will withdraw my power, don't strain yourself or you will collapse." Jude nodded at the witch's gentle voice as his nose bled, and he felt like falling down. He soon collapsed beside Cordelia. The level has risen. Several pure white rings surrounded them. Moreover, he heard in his head a voice saying that he got the title of Demon Slayer. All abilities +3 and a 5% increase to attacks against great demons. While on the verge of fainting, Jude thought that he had to take care of things first before passing out. And it was the same with Cordelia. F***ck, the reward was good. Half of her face was bloody because of the fresh blood from her nose, but even then, her smile was beautiful. She's indeed an incomparably beautiful girl. And that was it. Unlike the last time he fainted, Jude couldn't even mention about his Gumjulmeek because he had already lost consciousness and fainted. Cordelia saw such a Jude once again and smiled while mentally swearing. She soon clenched her teeth to keep herself awake. It wasn't yet the time for her to faint now. There was something else that she had to confirm. Lady Cordelia, Mr. Bayer. As she saw Lucas running towards them, Cordelia finally sighed in relief. Lucas was also safe. The demonic monster was defeated, and the barrier was probably broken now. So it was okay for her to faint now. The aftermath, please. Cordelia spoke quietly as she lost her consciousness, and Lucas nodded at this déjà vu scene again. As expected, they're a fantasy couple. From demonic human to demonic monster. The chemistry of the two was really fantastic. Alternating between Jude and Cordelia as if he was envious, Lucas then reached out and properly laid down the two on the ground. And the witch's soul looked down at Lucas, blinked her eyes several times and said, I can't ascend yet, right? The witch frowned as she looked at Jude and Cordelia's faces, but soon, just like Lucas, she casually had a warm smile on her face. Chapter 34, Episode 34, Full Moon 1. If you can hear my voice, open your eyes, wake up and look at me. Jude slowly opened his eyes at the faintly heard voice. What he saw was a warm light and a cozy space. His eyes then caught the face of a witch with long black hair and green eyes. You're finally awake. In front of him was a white-faced beauty, around 30 years old. The witch wore a black dress decorated with blackbird feathers, and a wide-brimmed cone hat on her head, which were the typical symbols of a witch. This is the world of my consciousness. Your body was overwhelmed and has fallen into a deep sleep, so I woke you up here to share my story. Now, hold my hand and get up. In a daze, Jude stood up holding the witch's hand, and on the other side, he could see Cordelia standing up while holding the witch's hand as well. Cordelia. Jude. It's so nice to see you two taking care of each other here too. The voice who spoke was not from the two witches standing in front of the two, but rather from the rocking chair in front of the fireplace. There was another witch sitting there. Now both of you come here, it's warm in front of the fireplace. When the witch in front of the fireplace beckoned, the witches in front of Jude and Cordelia suddenly became haze and vanished. Jude and Cordelia looked at each other spontaneously and exchanged glances, and then nodded. Let's go for now. The witch will not likely harm us. As Jude and Cordelia stood in front of the fireplace, the witch also stood up from the rocking chair. First of all, I need to talk about my story, but I'll ask you in advance, so please answer me. Do you know why I'm sealed here? She was asking if we knew the real reason why the witch was sealed. In the eyes of the witch, who was inwardly full of expectations, Jude hesitated and pretended to not know, while Cordelia nodded without thinking. I see, you know this again, you know. The witch became openly sullen, drooping her shoulders as she pouted a bit. The real reason why the witch was sealed. Despite being a lowly slave, the witch brought down numerous demons, and the existence of such a witch was enough to offend the 5 great monarchs of hell. Eventually, the witch clashed with Belial, known as the monarch of corruption, and one of the 5 great monarchs of hell. She suffered a crushing defeat at the overwhelming power of the great monarch. But just before Belial's flames completely extinguished the witch's soul, another monarch stole the witch's soul, and that was Asmodeus, the monarch of lust. Asmodeus thought that the witch's soul, who overthrew countless demons, could become a dagger to stab other great monarchs. Asmodeus sealed the witch's soul deep in the forest of Trafalgar in order to hide the witch's soul from the other monarchs until the day it would become useful, as well as to make the witch's soul submissive to him. That is why the great witch's soul was sealed in the human world, and why there was only one demonic monster that protected the seal. If the witch's seal was in hell, or even if it was in the human world and had a lot of guardians protecting the seal, it was highly likely that the other monarchs would notice it. Having said that, when the witch made a sullen face, Cordelia hurriedly opened her mouth and said, No about that, well, I don't know, please tell us more about it. Really? Yes, really. The witch was enchanted by Cordelia's words and bright smile, and soon, a smile spread on the witch's face too. And Jude's thought at that time, you must have been lonely. It was understandable since she was trapped alone in the seal for hundreds of years. So, to begin, the witch began telling her story clearly and softly, and Cordelia's eyes sparkled as she became a good listener. After 4 hours or so. And that's how it happened. The witch widely smiled with a satisfied face, while Cordelia and Jude nodded with exhausted faces. It was briefly summarized in the game, but it was a really long story if you heard the full story directly. That was refreshing. Now then, let's get to the main point. What? You've been talking for 4 hours, and you're only starting to get to the main point now. Cordelia was surprised and asked back, and the witch laughed and came close to her. I've finally finished telling you about the past, so let's talk about the future. In fact, there was no such conversation in the original story. The witch who had possessed Cordelia's body and defeated the monster immediately ascended afterwards. Cordelia, you're a lovely child. You contained my soul for a moment, and I have seen the potential of your soul and body, the potential that you have the same power as mine. Unlike before, the witch who has spoken so far had a crafty smile, and then she kissed Cordelia's forehead, eyes, cheeks, neck, chest, and the back of her hands in order. Why, witch? I left my mark on your soul. Remember my feelings when you use my power. Increase your own strength through that. The witch whispered in Cordelia's ear, and after deeply swallowing, Cordelia recited the spell taught to her by the witch. She changed in a moment. However, it was a little different from the previous witch transformation made by the witch herself. Cordelia's hair was dyed black, but the tips were still red. Instead of both eyes turning green, her usual blue eyes became more vivid. Go and increase your strength. Cordelia's witch transformation. It is a reinforced transformation spell with a time limit, and when in the witch state, all magical abilities are greatly increased. As Cordelia nodded and looked at herself, the witch affectionately kissed her forehead one more time. Look carefully at the place where I was sealed. There should be a spell book that I wrote there. It was a spell book that contained all of the witch's magic spells. Thank you very much, witch. As Cordelia bowed her head in greeting, the witch laughed and hugged Cordelia. And Jude, who watched all these, cleared his throat. Ahem, ahem. A cough that meant you don't have anything for me. Unlike the original story, Jude had also met the witch, so shouldn't he get something too? Of course, this journey had already given Jude the skills of the Guardians of the Holy Cross, but wasn't there a saying that stated that, the more the better? At Jude's appeal, the witch narrowed her eyes and said with a slight lick on her lips, Jude, you're not compatible with me. Rather, you possess other possibilities. Jude turned at her unexpected words. Another possibility. In the original story, after the treatment of his Gyumjul-meek, Jude became a powerful warrior with the help of his Chunmujich. But now, the witch's words didn't seem to be talking about that. You don't know much about yourself yet, but don't you worry, fate will guide you to it. Jude blinked his eyes in curiosity, and the witch smiled strangely, acting as if she didn't know, as she stroked Cordelia's head. Find the place where the demonic monster lived. There must be something that can help the both of you. And that was it. The witch released her hand from Cordelia and then stepped back, placing both Jude and Cordelia in her sight. You've been delayed for too long. I think I should leave now, but Cordelia and Jude. The witch's body floated in the air. The area in front of the cozy fireplace, as well as the surrounding areas, turned into a dark and black space. We will meet again. It was words that implied a reunion, not an eternal parting. Jude and Cordelia were surprised for a moment at the different dialogue from the original story, but that was it. Before they could even speak out, their vision was tinged in darkness. Zah! Jude and Cordelia opened their eyes at the same time and raised their upper bodies simultaneously. Young master. Miss. The voices they heard almost at that same moment belonged to Jun and Dahlia, respectively. Jude and Cordelia blinked their eyes and looked at each other before realizing that they were still inside the witch's sealing area. Oh, you've come to your senses. Lucas, who was standing at the side and talking with the knights, came to them with a bright face. The witch guided the knights. I've told everyone about what happened here. What happened here? Yes, I've conveyed everything I saw without exceptions. Lucas proudly stretched his shoulders and tapped his chest, and the knight's facial expressions were as unusual as him. Everyone was looking at Jude and Cordelia with happy and warm-hearted expressions. What the hell did he say? Why is Dahlia looking like that? Cordelia quickly asked Jude with a glance, but instead of answering her, he closed his eyes. Jude had a rough idea on what happened. As it is, it's better not to ask. However, Lucas already opened his mouth, as if not thinking about Jude's feelings. The moment when the monster's attack was about to hit Lady Cordelia, the sight of Mr. Bear flying towards Lady Cordelia was really amazing. It was a proof of true love that didn't even fear death. Like a heroic novel enthusiast, Lucas began to speak strangely about what happened. The knights, led by Dahlia, all looked at Jude and Cordelia happily again, and Cordelia looked at Jude. Jude then quickly said, with a glance, "No, it's not. Will they believe me if I told them it's the fairy steps?" "I know, right?" The two exchanged a conversation by just looking at each other, and they tried to get over the situation by coughing and clearing their throat, as if they had promised each other. Fortunately, Lucas didn't bother the two too much. "All the knights are fine. The witch said that both of you were very tired, but that there were no problems with your health. Although we were covered in blood, it was as Lucas had said, that we were just tired and had nothing wrong with our bodies. We've decided to stay here overnight and leave the forest early tomorrow morning." "Yes, that sounds good. We had to bring the witch's spell book and a helpful item that was in the monster's nest. Of course, we were also tired and exhausted." Jude closed his eyes for a moment and thought about the flow of the original story. Cordelia having obtained the witch transformation. Two facts came to light when she repelled the pursuers of the Devil's Hand in the witch's forest. One fact was that the Devil's Hand kidnapped the children of the 12 families to use them as a sacrifice for demon summoning. The other fact was that the place where the demon summoning ritual was held and what date the ritual was supposed to take place. There wasn't enough time to go back to Count Chase to announce the crisis, so in the end, the troubled Cordelia decided to head north to save the children of the 12 families and stop the ritual. That scenario is already gone, though. The Devil's Hand couldn't kidnap any of the 12 families' children. Even if Cordelia escaped in the original story, they still carried out the ritual because they used characters such as Lucas and Sylvia as sacrifices. But now, it was questionable if the ritual would be held when none of the children were secured. Moreover, the attack of the Devil's Hand was enough to raise the awareness of the northern cities. It would be impossible to hold a large-scale attack now that the vigilance against the demonic followers have increased. But there is still a chance. The purpose of Jude and Cordelia was not just to follow the main scenario. Their goal was to twist the main scenario and create a happy ending that did not originally exist. Let's go to the north. If the ritual is held, stop it. He must also twist Jude's main scenario, the northern barbarians' great attack, from its very roots. When Jude made up his mind and opened his eyes, Lucas continued to explain. First, we plan to stop by the Northern Viscount's mansion and stay for a day or two as scheduled, and I think the people from my home will meet us there and join us in our journey to the northern place. At Lucas' explanation, Jude and Cordelia looked at each other simultaneously, and they exchanged glances. The reason was simple. Who is coming? There was no event in the original story where a number of people were sent to meet each of the 12 families' children. In other words, the arrival of Gar, Elle and Count Chase to pick us up earlier was also different from the original story. Who will come to meet us from Count H.R. Svelga? As Jude began to think of the people of Count H.R. Svelga with a serious face, Cordelia just shook her head and looked at Lucas as she asked, "Lord Lucas, do you know who is coming?" "Yes, it's someone that I really admire that is coming. It's a bit embarrassing, but it's been a while since I've seen him, so I'm looking forward to meeting him again." Jude and Cordelia's curiosity grew even greater when Lucas spoke with sparkling eyes, like he did when talking about adventures. Who is it? Who is it that Lucas had such a reaction? When Jude and Cordelia showed their keen interest, Lucas said with a proud face, "You've both heard of the red-haired warrior, right?" Jude and Cordelia nodded together. They obviously have heard of him. Red-haired warrior. The Red Flame Landius. He was one of the 5 main characters of Legend of Heroes 1. However, in Legend of Heroes 2, he no longer appeared because his setting was to die in the beginning.